welcome to Fit to Speak. I'm Eugene. So glad to have you with us. Today, as the virtual spring semester starts back up, or in some cases has already begun for many students, I'll talk with Masongo Ogora, a senior media and communications studies major at UMBC, about his thoughts on whether or not the business model of college as we know it should change. That and more coming up later in the show. But first, I want to start off by wishing all of you that are watching this program a very belated Happy New Year. 6 days in, though, it looked a little more like 2020, the sequel. A group of supporters of former U.S. President Donald Trump, who, let us be clear, was the loser of the 2020 election, but is the winner of one prize no president has ever won, being impeached, not once, but twice. Even winning a pig on Wheel of Fortune in the 80s would be better. But I digress. That did actually happen, by the way. Anyway, a bunch of Trump supporters invaded the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. And yet, despite all the video that you're seeing currently, and seeing people like this dude, Candace Owens and Sarah Palin, instead of actually acknowledging and condemning the violence that occurred, they, as with a lot of people in the GOP, blamed Antifa for the insurrection. And the networks that cater to those who find the views of folks who grift and who can see Russia from their house palatable continue to spread these, shall we say,
alternative facts.
Fox News, which just so happens to have a homogenous viewer base, as we've mentioned on this program, which is not an alternative fact, has been falling in the ratings, losing out to CNN and MSNBC. I believe there to be two factors for this, which I will talk about in a future edition of this program. Folks, here's another actual fact for you. All of this, was domestic terrorism. And for this past inauguration, there were more than 25,000 National Guard troops in D.C., more than Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria put together. And just going back, when I looked at these videos, I thought that these domestic terrorists were giving overseas terrorists a televised how-to manual. Osama bin Laden must be smiling and blushing in his grave at the sea. Oh, and just as a bit of an aside, it's very comforting, by the way, to know that even college bars like the long, and I mean very, very long departed and infamous First Eternal in College Park, Maryland, was much more secure than the U.S. Capitol building on that fateful day. But in all seriousness, in just a matter of one day, and if you want to go further, a matter of just shy of 2 months since the election was called for President Biden, the narratives espoused by the former president, his administration, and much of his fan base sank like quicksand. And like rats jumping off a sinking ship, many Trump administration officials resigned. In an episode that we did on Thanksgiving last year, journalist, entrepreneur, and podcast host Marcus Dowling had this to say about the future of the GOP.
Okay, the GOP is in trouble. I'll just say it point blank, period. Donald Trump stretched the party so far right that people like Mitch McConnell look like they're centrists, which is completely absurd.
As usual, Marcus is correct. And by the way, it's an episode worth revisiting on facebook.com/VCSE Media. And in furtherance on how Marcus is correct on really everything, thanks to the role that Stacey Abrams and many other leaders and activists on the ground in Georgia played, the state sent 2 Democratic senators in Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff to Congress. Now, the GOP, had they actually been focused, they actually could have won those Senate races and served as a check to President Biden's agenda. But no, instead, the GOP had about as many brain cells as Clemson football coach Dabo when he ranked Ohio State number 11. We saw how that turned out earlier this month. And just like Dabo in that particular instance, the GOP's priorities after the election last year were backwards, talking about Antifa, how to suppress the vote, voter fraud claims that wouldn't even pass muster on Judge Judy, and holding press conferences near crematoriums and adult entertainment stores. Put another way, had the GOP concentrated on the Georgia Senate race the way that Dwayne Haskins focuses on strippers and flouting COVID rules, and Juju Smith-Schuster focuses on losing playoff games after creating TikTok videos, perhaps they'd be in a good position. One person who has actually turned out to be in a very good position was the Reverend Jeremiah Wright. Remember him?
The stuff we have done overseas is now brought right back into our own front yards. America's chickens are coming home to roost. Violence begets violence. Hatred begets hatred. And terrorism begets terrorism. A white ambassador said that, y'all, not a black militant.
Reverend Wright was right. It's just too bad that too many people were all in their feelings when this sermon was unearthed during President Obama's 2008 run. Obama should have never even condemned him, by the way, but hey, that's just me. As we've learned on January 6th, well, some more than others, America's chickens have come home to roost, and so too have the GOP's.
Eugene, I think as much as I don't want it to change, we're already here, as you said. And I personally think that, yeah, we already are in the future, because I actually walk around my campus sometimes and I think to myself, like, wow, like I'm never going to be in these buildings again, because we just got an update on the spring semester and we're already automatically online. So it's just kind of like, it's kind of crazy to walk around on campus and think like, wow, I'm never going to be in the library again or anything. And I'm like graduating next semester. And, I just think outside of that, I'm just like, this is just a waste of money. We're spending billions or possibly trillions of dollars simply to pay for these buildings, and now they're not even being used. So I think colleges could invest in online. However, I have talked to my parents about this. My dad actually has told me they have to come back, because there's no way that they can't make money if people aren't not really necessarily occupying campus, but the buildings are not really being utilized. There has to be a hybrid for college to actually survive in the traditional sense that we know it. But to kind of go further into what we were planning to talk about in terms of college being useful, college being useful in today's economy, I think that personally, I think everyone should definitely get an education regardless, because education is king right now in terms of how we view capitalism, racism, all this other stuff. Having an education unlocks doors that you may never have imagined, especially with college, having a master's, new bachelor's is what I keep hearing. And I'm actually applying to grad school as we speak, to Columbia.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, thank you. So in that aspect, while I definitely would like to just kind of settle with my bachelor's and work, get my experience, get my hands dirty, I think having that backup will really set you apart, because in reality, and I'll see a lot of these conversations on Twitter, really, if you really want to get into it, like the HBCU versus PWI conversation, and in terms of especially Black students, in which I just recently had a class last semester, gender women studies, and it's called the female offender, and we were talking about how women are usually put in jail in terms of socioeconomic status and such. But what really got me from that class was the school to prison pipeline, and how easy it is for Black women to be ostracized from grade school until even after college. Regardless, from the day they're born, obviously we know Black women have suffered so much, but it's amazing how the school system fails them, despite the fact that they are always succeeding throughout the obstacles. So in that sense, in terms of education, I think in order for you to separate yourself, because it's really you have jobs, there's jobs available in this country, but having a career job now, having a career salary where you are not only taking care of yourself, you're taking care of a roommate, you're taking care of a potential spouse, children, family members, that really sets you apart from other counterparts. And I think if anyone wants to make money in this country, legally speaking, of course, I think they should definitely go that route, because, without that, you can definitely survive. You won't have debt or anything, but it'd be a lot harder to establish yourself, to gain capital. Because my mother actually just recently introduced me to credit, and she was telling me, you need to understand credit, because credit determines where you live, what kind of car you buy, the kind of restaurants and stuff you can eat at, and simply where you stand in terms of the social strata. So therefore, I think college is extremely, extremely essential during this time, despite the fact that I think it is a scam, because you're really paying for time, and that time is money that you're not really getting back, because most people may have to borrow from financial aid from the government, there's that rare chance, someone could have a sponsor, but most people are paying out of pocket. Parents are paying out of pocket. So it's that whole thing, and scholarships too, of course, but it's that whole thing of like, are you willing to put aside 4 to potentially like 7 years, depending on what you're doing, to learn about something that you're passionate about, not something that you're forced to do? Because at least from my situation, to get a little personal, if I'm not talking too much, I actually used to be a STEM major, and coming from an African household, STEM is life. Like doctor, lawyer, engineer. Like if you get one of those, you are set for life.
Mm-hmm.
And which I agreed with until recently, where I started having an epiphany where I realized I never really had a choice to figure out what I wanted to do, because pretty much from birth, from childhood, I was pretty much molded into this direction. And it's not like I hated it, everyone struggles with stuff generally. For me, it was just more of like, I didn't really know who I was growing up. Like even in high school, where my grades actually had suffered, and like I was dealing with depression I didn't even realize at the time, mental health issues. And, I was like blaming my family and culture for everything, like finding out about my blackness and such. And I pretty much ended up at community college. I actually applied to UMBC prior to, but I don't think actually didn't get in. The only school I actually got in was it was VCU. I forget the name. It was HBCU in Virginia. But my dad pretty much was like, no, you're not going there. Case closed. And culturally, I see why, because college is about branding. It really is all about branding at the end of the day. So you're really paying, like, when people see that on the resume, that you may get the job because of the school you went to, not even because of your skills. Because that once they see that you went to school and they have that connection, you're guaranteed an in. And that's how America works. Like small stuff like that, the kind of shoes you wear, the kind of places you go to shop.
You'll hear much more from Masongo in a future edition of Fit to Speak, and we're going to have a bonus episode featuring Masongo in the very near future, so be sure to be on the lookout for that on vimeo.com/CSE Media. And by the way, one of the best things I saw on TV this month, and really the best example of corporate synergy, was the Saints-Bears football game, American football that is, on Nickelodeon of all places. Now, slime cannons, all kinds of stuff were going on. It was actually quite a fun game to watch. Now, we'd show you highlights, but we don't want Roger Goodell to have a coronary now, do we? So this Sports Illustrated article, which perfectly encapsulates all of my thoughts, will suffice. It goes in part, quote, "To have the game stripped of all its self-importance and hubris was an absolute delight. I came through the pregame show, which featured a conversation between SpongeBob, Patrick Starr, and Sandy Cheeks about what football actually is, better off than I would have if I'd spent the last half hour mainlining thoughtless football guy platitudes on the Ford Toyota Built America stand flag, no politics unless it's my politics pregame show." It was also a break from hearing Joe Buck, yes, I know, he works on Fox Sports, saying, "Pass is caught." Well, one thing Nickelodeon did catch are a lot of viewers. 2 million, as a matter of fact, the highest in 4 years. The article closes with this absolute gem, which I think sums it all up. Quote, "And I'm glad I stumbled back here with all the trappings of childhood to remember how good something in its purest and most innocent form can be." And thank you so much for watching. Listen, there's going to be a lot more where that came from, so you better stay tuned to catch it all. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel so that you can be the first to get all of our videos. And don't forget to follow us on all of our social media accounts for more information, including all of the bonus content that you'll see from today's show. And until next time, I'm Eugene, and remember, we will not be silenced.